Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's episode of Hey Sister. Hey Sister, how you doing tonight?
Oh, today's a very interesting one. So we have a lot to talk about. So I'm just ready to jump into it.
Well, we are super excited to have our friend and America's favorite psychotherapist, Miss Janie Lacy, on with us tonight. How you doing, Janie?
I am doing well. Thank you, ladies, for having me.
Thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you so much for being here. We're really excited. We have a lot that we want to talk about today. And so, everyone, thank you for tuning in tonight to Hey Sister. As you know, we always start our show with a hot topic. And unfortunately, the news over the last few days has been about another mass shooting. We have had over 250 mass shootings in the United States in the year of 2019. And a mass shooting is in where there's any any number over one persons that are shot at a time is what how they classify a mass shooting. And we know over this past weekend, we went to bed on Saturday with the knowledge of a mass shooting in El Paso, and then woke up with another mass shooting in Dayton, Ohio, within a matter of less than a 24-hour period. So I don't know. There have been lots of conversations and thoughts. I've done my own thoughts, ranting, and ruminations. And I am at a loss. Like, thoughts and prayers just don't cut it for me anymore. Um, we really need some legislation. We really need some reform. And, having grown up in South Louisiana, know lots of people who hunt and fish. An assault rifle is just not needed to hunt a deer or a squirrel or a rabbit or any type of game. So we have to have an honest conversation about those weapons and what they are for, and they're for warfare, and therefore harming as many people as possible in a short period of time. And then once again, we lean to the argument of mental health. And so we're lucky to have Janie here tonight so we can kind of talk about that mental health angle. But what we also are juxtapose that with the climate that has been created um, by the current resident of the White House. Because this young man drove from Allen, Texas, and I know Allen, Texas very well. I have a friend who lives in Allen, Texas. To drive from Allen, Texas to El Paso to kill Mexicans when Texas was Mexico. I just don't understand. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. So I don't know, sister, what are you feeling right now?
Um, I don't know. I have a whole bunch of feelings. Obviously, I feel sad and saddened for the families of all of these victims. But of course, I'm also very angry. As I also pointed out today earlier on Facebook, thoughts and prayers are insufficient at this time. It's really time for us to have turn this anger into action, and we need to have some strategies and solutions, because it's not enough to say, we're pro-life on one side of an argument, but we're not protecting life from cradle to the grave. We're not doing that. We are mincing words when it comes to racism and white supremacy. And quite frankly, and where, Janie obviously comes in, is I think that, you and I, sister, have talked about Marianne Williamson running for president and some of the comments that have been made about her. And one of the things that she is talking about, very much so, about the soul of this country and who we are. And so I think for me, it's like, you know, what are we becoming, or have we always been this? But the fact that it feels like we are just becoming way too desensitized to these stories over and over and over again. And to be frank, I lost a lot of hope after Sandy Hook, because again, when it was babies, I figured if no one's going to do anything about babies, they're certainly not going to do anything about me. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I would love to hear, Janie's thoughts on how do you process this stuff and not get desensitized, but also not allow it to, eat at you.
I saw something today, and it was actually very shocking in the sense that they looked at that number that was just shared, the 251 mass shootings in 2019, and there was a comparison to all these other countries. And by far, the zeros and just ones here and there, was very shocking. But one of the things that I look at in these situations is, you're right, there's a lot of desensitization that comes on. There's lots of blame that gets passed. And there's a few things that from a psychologist perspective that I look at is that we are always fighting stigmatization against mental health. And the first thing that's always thrown in these cases, and I have not worked with this family, I know nothing of their history, but I can make some assumptions based on psychological profiles of shooters. But one of the things that is thrown on there, and I like to always say this when it comes up, just because when people hear mental illness and there's depression or anxiety, and I'm not talking about a shooter, doesn't mean someone's going to go out and do mass shootings or going to go out and kill someone. And I think sometimes this also contributes to the stigma around mental health, because they think people are just crazy, and then they don't want to acknowledge their own depression and their own anxiety because of the stigma that's out there. So that's one thing that I see out of these situations. But the other thing, if we look at psychological profiles of shooters, it's not even necessarily about having mental health reform and having mental health services available. It goes down to the root and our family systems, and the families that know that when we have someone in our family that is isolated or has some type of messaging or have sometimes we will just shy away from them. We don't address it. So there's a boots to the ground for me way that people can deal with this. And this is the root system. This is the family system. It's not even necessarily we have to have mental health reform and all these other things, because if we can have all these things, if someone's not taking advantage of those services, or if they're so into their own viewpoint, they're not going to take advantage of those services. But from the onslaught, we're now having exposure to our children. We're having exposure to a lot of people where we have to have conversations around what has happened, and to really get down to the point of putting a face to all these victims and going into grief, even though we didn't personally know them. There's a lot of times that, especially if we don't watch, we become desensitized. We have the news on in our family system. There's something that we call vicarious trauma, right? So if our children are watching all of these mass shootings and we're hearing all the news in the background, whether they're going to the grocery store or wherever, it's always playing in the background, there has to be a conversation with our children about what this means. How does this affect them? How do they feel about it? So when it gets down to me, I think about the roots, and that's the individual family system, all the people that are consuming this, is let's just not desensitize it in our family. Let's have conversations about not only just mental health, but about, when we have something wrong in our family system, how do we address it? Because we can look at, this is now a situation that is broadcast, but what about in our own family systems where someone in our family has racism rhetoric that's going on, or they themselves have rage, or they themselves have been bullied, or the bully? How do we address these? Because it's happening in every single family. So there's an opportunity for us to have a conversation around it. We don't know all the details about these particular incidences yet, or the potential mental illness that was there. So when I kind of look at those three categories in particular, when I hear the mass shooting, right, we're looking at, just to recap, we're looking at the conversations we have with our children so that we don't become desensitized and we desensitize them. And then kind of looking at our own family system, are there things that there's opportunities for us to address and make sure that we are as emotionally and mentally healthy and supportive and loving as possible? And then we're looking at the psychological profile of a shooter. And what do we do when we see this, if our children are in a classroom, if they're a teen and they know that there's someone who's isolated and who has been bullied or is a bully? I mean, there's some signs when we kind of look back at the studies of shooters, there's some commonalities among all of them. And there's usually information that comes out around their families or someone knowing something was off about them.
Yeah. It's been a very interesting time and a very, very sobering conversation to have as we prepare to go back to school. Mm-hmm. Because I do believe, when we had you on once before, it was around Parkland, and so here we are another year later, and we're having a similar conversation. And within less than 24 hours, we've had 2 mass shootings, and within a week, we've had 3 mass shootings. So yeah, I think that there's conversations that we can definitely have in all of our families. And I think that, as we segue into our topic today about families, truth, secrets, and lies, what are some of those secrets that people may be holding about their own family members that could be an impediment to preventing some of these things from occurring? Because the secrets that we tell ourselves about why we need assault rifles, or the lies we tell ourselves, I should say, not secret, but the lies we tell ourselves about why we need certain types of weapons, the secrets we hold about our children if they're struggling, or they may be depressed, or may have some they may be filled with rage, and we just don't know how to cope with it, so we just ignore it. There's so many segues into our conversation today. But as we said in the setup, so for all of you Queen Sugar fans out there, we have been watching this season's episode and watching the Bordelon family confront and deal with the writing of Nova's book. We know that Queen Sugar is a fictional piece of work, but we also know that art often imitates life. And in all of our lives, we talked about, what are some of the truths we hold for ourselves? What are some of the secrets that are held on to and that are hurting us? And then what are some of the lies we tell ourselves within the context of family, whether it's for survival, go along, get along, I don't know, whatever it is. We want to hit on all of that good stuff tonight and go real deep into this topic. So Janie recently did a talk called "You're Only as Sick as Your Secrets," right? Or "You're as Sick as Your Secrets," something like that. But tell us about that conversation that you had, and then why family secrets are so toxic.
So that term, "we are as sick as our secrets," comes from Alcoholics Anonymous. And we look at addicts. Addicts hide, they lie, and they deny. So a lot of times when there's addictions, it comes down our family line. But what happens is, and I can't even look at my own personal life, my dad passed on he died, and on his certificate, his death certificate, it says a stroke. But the truth is he was an alcoholic, and he died because of complications because of his alcoholism, right? But if we have those real conversations, then you're disrupting a whole family system. So when we look at addictions, and we look at trauma, and we look at abuse, it is so important that we tell the truth. And we tell the truth because we are as sick as our secrets. The things that we hold inside of us will affect us physically. It'll affect us emotionally. It'll affect our quality of our relationships in our family, because there are families where we don't talk about anything that's negative. Or I'm asking you to come to Thanksgiving, and I'm asking you to pass the peas to Uncle Bob who molested you, and I've never acknowledged that, right? So we have these systems that go on, and then what happens inside is just like that drinking slow poison. You're going to rot from the inside out. The secrets that we keep, it affects us. But what I also believe, when we're dealing with family secrets, children in the family, by the time of 18 to 21, depending on their maturity level, need to know the family secrets, because they will repeat themselves psychologically, behavioral. And even if they don't know, even if we don't know the secrets that have happened before us, we catch what happens. So if we don't talk about things, we deny things, then we learn, okay, well, I can't bring this up because mom denies. So then what do? We're either going to continue that on, and we're going to pass that on to our children, because we learn what we call splitting. We only talk about the good news junk, right? But when you bring me the bad news, I don't want to hear it. And then you cut them off. So then as a little person, we all have templates. So you catch that template to realize, okay, well, there's something wrong with me trying to address this. And then what happens is we get toxic shame. And in toxic shame, that's where people are very defensive. They deny, and they just can't And a lot of times people also learn to compartmentalize. So things that have happened, they learn to put it in a little attic and put boxes. So then they really convince themselves that these things really didn't happen. And then what happens is you become enraged inside. And then that's where mental illness can enters into the play. We can have anxiety, we can have depression, we can suffer with so many things and not understand that it's not necessarily a biological disease that has happened, but it's been something that we formed over time because we learned that we can't trust, we can't talk. Because if we can't even trust, I'm looking at a typical family system. If we can't even trust, let's say, let's put it to a 16-year-old. If she can't go to her mom and talk to her about what happened with cousin Joey when she was 10 years old, we don't talk about that. Don't talk about that. What's happening to that 16-year-old? She's going to be holding that inside thinking, well, what's wrong with me? Am I not good enough? And then she's going to take on all of these internal messages, and then she's going to recycle it with how she acts in the world. And that's how we affect our family system, by not just being radically truthful. And doesn't mean that we have to have a billboard, right? It just means in our own family system that we can be truthful, we can be a safe place. Because if our family cannot be safe in the place that we are rooted in and the place that we grow up in, then we're going to go out into the world. We're not going to trust people. We're going to either lie or hide ourselves. And then we're going to learn to pass on those same types of messaging to our own children if we have children.
So speaking of that, how then do people begin to break the cycles, right? Because to your point about toxic shame, I believe that it happens more often than not, but I don't think that people are necessarily intentionally trying to shame their children or guilt them into certain behaviors, but they do it very often. So if we have parents who are walking around carrying a whole lot of baggage, and then they're bringing kids into this world, they've never addressed their baggage. Their baggage is being handed down to their children, either directly, indirectly, consciously or subconsciously. How do you then break the cycle? That's my first question.
Well, I think we first have to acknowledge exactly what you said, is that sometimes people don't realize they're doing it because they're carrying, it's what we call carried shame. They're carrying shame from their own generation that happened to them before them, and they don't even realize they're doing it. In plenty of family sessions, just 2 weeks ago, it stands out in my mind, in a family session, one of the parents had said to the teenage child, just mixing up some of the details for confidentiality, and they had said to them, well, why are you always going running to your mama? Right? And in that statement right there, I understood what they were trying to say, but they didn't see anything wrong with that statement. So when I tried to say to them and show them that they were shaming, and that's why that particular child was not close to them, because they were sending the message, there's something wrong with you going to your mother, versus, dear son, I'm available to you. I'm here for you. Right? Which is really what they wanted to say, but they learned to communicate that way because they were communicated that way. Mm-hmm. So sometimes the communication is shaming the child or shaming each other, or, we can go to someone who we want to address things that have happened to us in the family system, but they haven't addressed it themselves. They're not healed, so that we're trying to do something in a way that they're not even ready to hear it. So like, for example, a lot of times people come through therapy and now they're enlightened, they understand their history, and now they want to go and have a conversation with mama or daddy. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, hold on here, right? Because you're set free doesn't mean they're ready to receive that information. And you can do more damage than you can do any type of healing in that relationship. So sometimes you have to really be strategic if you want to address someone who is unhealed. And there's other ways to invite them in that process. Because if they're unhealed, what I also will find is they're not going to be cheerleaders of therapy or coaching and trying to address these types of things. So what I say is, you be the light to them. You not shame them. You not tell them there's something wrong. You love them, and you gently, I call it the real slow pulling back the Band-Aid. You start addressing things in little bite-sized pieces that are most important. Because I'm always about, what's your intention? If you want to confront someone in your family, what is your intention? And can you finish your meal? And what I mean by can you finish your meal means that you are emotionally sound, you are emotionally tolerant, that you're going to be able to, whatever their reaction is, just as if you're at a meal, you're going to be so in control that you can finish your meal, versus I'm having this conversation because I'm expecting a certain type of reaction or a certain type of return. If you're going into any type of difficult conversation with someone that's not healed or has not acknowledged something that's happened in the family, you're probably not going to get the results that you need. So I always say work it out within yourself first, obviously therapy, coaching, or understanding what's my intention, why do I need to address this, and what if they don't respond in the way that I want them to respond? How is that going to affect me? Just some key pieces there.
That's really deep. We have a comment over. I have my watch party going on as well. And so I have a comment over in the watch party. So I want to read it to you. It says, my son goes back and forth with self-love. As he approaches 18, he refuses to seek help outside of myself and his father. Sadly, families lose the power to help and they're left to their own thoughts. I have been crucified by other mothers for sharing his privacy. What are your comments to that?
Well, with not knowing
at the precarious age, right? You know, just
yes.
even for a young man.
Well, with not knowing all the moving parts as far as who she's sharing with, what she's sharing, because I do believe we all have to have also discernment in that, and not to be able to just share everything just for the sake of venting, especially if it's involving one of our loved ones. But in that situation, it happens all the time where teens or young adults don't want to come into counseling because, going back to what we mentioned earlier, there's a stigma, there's something wrong with me, whatever that may be. The best thing that you can do is be a supportive light to them. And that is sometimes understanding how your language, and I'm being very general here, understanding how your language could affect them. Are you going to them and saying, you need help, I'm going to make an appointment with a therapy? Of course, someone's going to shut down if they're already struggling with self-love and what's wrong with me inside. So how we approach those topics says a lot about how they're going to receive it. So until we get to that point of actually asking them to get help, or did we do all that we can do? Are we building them up? And we're not talking about that you're good at basketball. I'm saying, I'm just so glad that I'm your mom. You know, I love you as a son. You're just so great. And talking to them about character traits, especially if you know that they struggle with self-love, is constantly looking for authentic ways to speak life into them. But then also let them see you doing self-work. What does it look like for as a parent to model self-love and self-work and being able to talk to yourself in a way? Because many times we can affect our children, not even about direct communication to them. We're looking in the mirror and saying, boy, I look fat today, or look at my hair. And then they learn that negative talk, right? So then it starts becoming who they are. So a couple of things I would say with that, with the information, without having all the moving parts, is first looking at the language that you are sharing with your son around asking them for help or getting them help. And then looking at how much do you build them up, even in the midst of them being in what I call the valley days, even in those dark moments. Are you looking for things that they're doing well, building them up, and spending as much quality time with them as you possibly can on things that they enjoy? So if he's 18, and let's say, for example, he likes playing Fortnite, mom, get in there with him, play Fortnite, ask about the characters, focus on something outside of him, but something that he enjoys because you're spending time with him. And then he sees you're interested in him because you're interested in this, which you would rather not be doing. It's amazing sometimes when children or young adults are in those dark moments, that if we just come alongside them and show interest in something that they know we're not even interested in, but we really show them interest, then we're building a safe relationship with them, because we cannot influence our own children if they don't feel safe with us. So and I'm talking about emotionally safe, because as moms in particular, there's 3 things that we have to provide our children, and that's comfort, nurture, and safety. And if we feel like we've given all of that to them, then we should be a safe place for them to be able to talk to them about whatever's happening in their life.
Woo.
Well, so I have a question also, another question.
All right, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Are there questions or comments?
No, I'm going back and forth. I'm just trying to check as we go along here.
Okay, so in the context of Queen Sugar, because I'm trying to keep it as generic as possible so no one feels like we're talking about their lives. In the context of Queen Sugar, so Nova wrote the book. Everybody is like upset about the secrets that she revealed, and they have thus distanced themselves from her. At what point do you confront someone head on if you feel like they've crossed the line, or you opt to just love them from a distance and cut them off?
I think in a general way to answer that question is we have to look at is how does whatever that secret is affect me directly? Is it hurting me? Is it helping me? Or is it not affecting me? Right? So first, those would be the first things, because the other side of it is sometimes because when we are free and we are radically honest, and we feel like we got to be radically honest about everything around us. And that's not necessarily using discernment, right? So we have to think about how does this affect me, and what's also going to be the consequences of me sharing whatever this information is. So I'm always about looking at, okay, how does this affect me? How does it impact me? Why do I need to share this? What form do I need to share this? And what do I feel like is going to happen as a result of sharing this? Is it going to bring healing, or is it going to do more harm? Or is it just for me to go ahead and dump so I can feel better, right? So there's always a self-reflection that needs to happen first before we make any types of decisions on sharing family secrets.
Okay. I'm typing that down in the comments there because I think that's just really, really important to really, you just talked about the whole self-reflection piece. I don't think we do enough of that, right? And so how can we even encourage people to start that as a regular practice of really self-reflecting on the impact of these secrets, lies, or even a truth that has caused pain, right? I mean, there are some things that are truth, they're facts, but they have caused pain. How do we really encourage that, especially in light of so many people wanting to kind of block it all out, right? It's easier to block it all out and pretend that it just didn't happen.
Well, the way that everyone that's in this broadcast can start today is first thinking about what are the secrets that you have. And this is real deep, and it's really goes to the root for us as individuals, because it's real easy, especially when we start healing, to focus on all of this stuff out here, but we forget that we also came from this family system. So we also were taught from this family system. So we've also harmed people. We also have kept secrets and those types of things. So I think I'm always about first taking a personal inventory and thinking about, okay, what secrets do I have outstanding? And we do this as part of a program that I do, the Women Redeem, we call the Secrets List. So in order for us to really start healing and getting well, and the secrets list doesn't go out and talk to your friends about it, right? Obviously in therapy, there's confidentiality, there's laws that protect your space. But first looking at, I have to first be honest with myself. And that can be about whatever in my history. It could be, that he's been married 2 times, but those wives don't even know that he's cheated on them the whole time. It doesn't mean that he goes back and confronts those wives and say, let me let you know when I was married to you, I cheated on you. It's first that he has to own that himself in order to start doing that outer work. So I always say that that's the first key, and everyone can start that tonight. Is just take your own inventory and think about, even going back to your teenage years, what were the secrets that I kept? What are the secrets that I still have? Are there things that there are people in my life that if they had this relevant information, would it change our relationship? Because we always have this saying, we've all heard this, that what you don't know won't hurt you. And a lot of people buy into that mentality, and what you don't know, in some cases to me, will kill you. Because you need to know who you're dealing with in many, especially in relational contexts, right? Because one of the areas that I specialize is relational trauma. So a lot of times people it's because of secrets, it's because of unhealed stuff, or it's also, to your point, where we will confront people when we're not necessarily healed. We're confronting them out of anger, right? Because I'll see a lot of times where women will now come to, it happens for women and men, but I work mostly with women, where they've now looked at, okay, well, cousin Peter, molested me when I was young, and I see him every Thanksgiving, and everybody knows, but no one says anything. And then once she owns that truth herself, now she wants to go and confront her mom and all this other stuff, and there's no strategic plan, and then it just blows up and it makes things worse. That's not what I'm asking people to do, and that's what I never ask people to do. But first, we have to be honest with ourselves, is what has happened to me, and as a result of what has happened to me, how have I behaved? What carried shame, or what kind of pathological behavior did I myself participate in? And when we do that, there's radical freedom in order to start the healing process.
Okay, well, we have a question here. It says, what if it doesn't feel like a secret to you, but the family thinks it is? And in the pre-show, as we were preparing, we talked about those open secrets, right? That everybody knows, everybody has talked about, but then when you try to have an open conversation, it becomes like World War III. Right.
Or
so.
like Jill Scott says in her song Family Reunion, when she's talking about her aunt Juicy, who they waiting for her to get around her cousin Lonnie, because we all know he got a little something on the side. So everybody knows he got a little something on the side, but we got to wait till our aunt gets drunk before we discuss it.
Right.
You know, why is it that, you know, if it doesn't, yeah, I like that question, Tita, sorry. What if it doesn't feel like a secret to you, but the family thinks it is?
Well, that's where I go back to, again, what is it? What's the context of it, right? Context does matter with that question. So what's the context of it? And then how does it concern you as an individual, right? Because if it really doesn't concern you, then why put a spotlight on it? But if it is something that is concerning you, regardless of your family feels it's a secret or not, it's your truth. And you should always walk in your truth, but walk in your truth with discernment. Because not everyone needs to hear your story. Not everyone needs to know what's going on in your family. So making sure that you understand the context of it. Why is this important to me? How does it impact me? And what's the consequences of me discussing this? Because to your point, if it's the cousin and we all know that he's a womanizer, those types of things, you know, if you're talking about it in the context of your safe relationships in your family, then go ahead and do that. But to go ahead and broadcast it when it doesn't necessarily directly impact you, and not to have to share that information with people that doesn't benefit them to understand that information. So to me, it all matters on the context of what the secret is.
Okay, we have another comment here about the self-reflection. So self-reflection is hard for us individually. So yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. It seems sometimes easier for people to reflect on others than to reflect on themselves. And so why is self-reflection such a challenge in your experience working with your clients?
I think exactly what that question is. It's difficult for us to be a prophet in our own life. And sometimes when we really look at who we are, we don't want to admit the bad parts of us or the shameful parts of us, because it can bring up other parts to us. And if we struggle with addictions or we struggle with avoidance, these types of things, by trying to acknowledge these things, our negative, what we call maladaptive coping mechanisms, psychology, are going to come out. So that's why we have helpers and healers. We have coaches and therapists who can help look into your life in a way that's going to be helpful and not harmful. But there's ways that you can also individually start the process. If you have a safe space, I would even just start with journal prompts, right? You can go on Pinterest. There's journal prompts about just looking at who am I and looking at, asking questions and just starting to self-reflect. Because I think to that question, a lot of people don't know where to start. So when they think about self-reflect, well, what does that mean? I understand what I like, what I don't like. So individually, you can just do that by using journal prompts or getting into a professional relationship with someone and helping them understand what you want to achieve by that. Because we're only going to go as far as who we acknowledge ourselves to be. If we don't acknowledge our strengths, our shortcomings, the things that are still hidden inside of us, it's like, to me, the mold behind the wall, it's eventually going to come out. And I always say that, especially when I'm looking at couples or people who are in affair relationships, or there's some type of active deception going on, right? There's always an A and a B. The A is like, you can continue to withhold this information, or we can strategically set you up for success in a way that information can be revealed to the person who needs it in the way that's best going to be suited for both parties involved. So I think in that case, being able to have someone help you decide A and B and what's relevant here and why do you need to know this information? Because I always say to people that we need to all have a PhD in our own history, because especially in relationships, we can get into relationships and I want you to know all about me and I don't even know all about me, right? So if we're not going to date ourselves, that means that we're going to take time to get to know ourselves and all parts of us, then we shouldn't even be dating.
Wow, that's powerful right there. Yes, a lot of people would not be dating, or may not even be married for that matter. We have a question here that I missed earlier in the watch party, but it kind of circles back to where we started with the mass shooting, that whole conversation. It says, what should schools be doing to help? Should schools implement healthy practices to help avoid issues that lead to depression, bullying, and mass shootings? I feel it's as important as PE. If you had the option to implement a program, what would it look like?
Well, this year we just now have state mandated conversations that are coming into the schools around mental and emotional health. So I think we'll watch and see how that unrolls, but that's exactly what I would do. Not only would, if it was up to me, I would implement programs around emotional and mental health and education around that, because the earlier it starts, the better. And the earlier we can get our young people to be able to have emotional language, right? Emotional intelligence. We show that the people have emotional intelligence, you're on a trajectory to be successful. So tying that into purpose-driven teaching it. But then the other part is I would teach life skills, life skills early on, mental and emotional health, but doing it in a way that is age appropriate, fun, and that would make them want to see the benefit from it immediately. And I look at the emotional language, right? So for those that are watching that have children, our children should be able to, so my son is 7. So if you were to ask him how he feels, he will tell you exactly how he feels. So he has the emotional language. All of us have 8 to 12 feelings of what we feel a day. And most of us as adults can name 1 or 2. I'm okay, happy, sad, right? So we're not in touch with that because we never were taught that. So I think we can see a change in our young adults if we started in elementary school and having a program that is age appropriate but incorporates mental, emotional, as well as life skills classes and behaviors and those types of things.
Yeah, I think that's powerful. That's about learning just emotional language and vocabulary. I struggle this even with my own children from time to time, and not time to time, all the time. It's like, how are you? Good. Okay. What does good mean to you? What does good look like? Can you define good for me? Because it's very limited. And I know some of that is just, with where they are developmentally, right? And but it's really interesting that our language is so limited when it comes to just what we're feeling and how to express what we're feeling. And when there is no ability to then outwardly express that using words, then it shows up in some other way. It shows up in pushing, shoving, fights, violence, all of these other things, when there's no way to just verbalize what's going on. And sometimes when you don't know what's going on, knowing to pause to process it, because sometimes you don't have the words right away.
Absolutely. And there are 2 things I would want to add to that. When kids feel bad, they act bad. And when kids are good and they feel good about themselves, that will also be an outpouring of that. But the other part of it is that we can have emotional language, but on the other side of it, we have to have people who also know how to handle that. Think about this, and everyone who's tuning into this broadcast, when we feel frustrated or we're sad and we go to our sisters in our inner circle and we're like, you know what, I'm just not feeling good about life right now. I'm feeling sad. How many times, oh, you okay? You're gonna be fine. Right? People don't know how to hold emotional space for each other. So we learn to lock those parts down. I know in my family system, we learn to isolate. If you're feeling bad, we don't go to each other, right? We go to our little side. And when I feel better, then I come out of the cave, right? How many people have learned to deal with their emotions that way? We isolate when we feel bad. We don't share it, but we can share the good news all day. So we have to, and I'm not talking about everybody deserves to know what's going on. I'm talking about our inner circle. So the way that we can start practicing that in our relationships is that if your sister friend is coming and saying, you know what, I'm just really frustrated with my husband, or I'm just really frustrated with that, is not to dismiss her feelings, because to say it's okay is dismissing someone's feelings. If we don't know how to respond to someone's emotional language when they're not feeling good, I always say, and I teach my clients this, you can just practice by asking a question. tell me more about that, right? You can just start by just asking a question and stay away from making statements, because then you're holding space for your sister friend. And she knows that when I'm going to come talk to Janie, that she's not going to judge me. She's not going to dismiss me, that she's going to be interested in how I feel. And she's not going to try to fix it unless I ask her advice. Because the other part of it is when people are in that emotional space, sometimes we can give unsolicited advice. And then what's going to happen next time they feel that way? I'm going to go back to my igloo and I'm going to deal with it myself, because whenever I go to Janie, she's always giving me advice, and I don't need advice. I just need somebody to listen to me. Right. And the same thing when it comes to marital relationships. So yes, we need to have emotional language, but we also need to know how to hold emotional space for someone when they come to us in their emotional state. But what happens is we don't know how to deal with that ourselves. So it makes us feel anxious. We don't know how to handle it. So we just try to make it go away, change the subject. It's going to be okay. So there's a whole system there that that affects one another.
So Janie, I try to do better with trying to make sure that I try to do better. Try to make sure that when somebody does come to me, I do ask, are you just venting, or did you want my advice? I try to do better in that area. I may not always succeed. Number one, should you be that direct with it? Like, were you just telling me that and you just wanted me to know it, or do you want me to respond? So that's part A. And part B is, and how do you fight the segue? Because that is my new thing. I'm always fighting the segue. I feel like a lot of times when I am expressive about, because I feel like growing up, I had whatever this stigma associated with me of being a goody two shoes, not never having issues, oh, you know, your life is perfect, all this other crap that I get tired of hearing. And then when you do go to someone and you're like, okay, let me have this moment of vulnerability, it feels like it's the segue for them to tell me what's really going on with them. Does that make sense?
Yes. So to answer your first question, I would absolutely not come out the gate and say to someone, if they're emotional, do you want my advice or you want me to vent, right? Because just imagine putting yourself in their shoes. If you're in an emotional state and then someone's coming out the gate, that's going to shut you down immediately.
Okay.
So, the segue would be later on is again, you truly being, and this is important, we truly have to be interested in our friends' emotions, right? So if you truly are you truly are connected to them, you truly care about them, you're going to hold this space. You're not going to hear you typing in the background or, whatever it may be. They're going to know that you're there for them. And then this is what I would say to ask instead is, how can I best be there for you? Or how can I help you, right? It's just softer, and it's asking them what they need from you without asking, well, what can I do, right? It's just checking in with them and being soft and gentle. And I think reflective listening, active listening comes into play. It's what we call mirroring. So we teach that to couples, is sometimes just occasionally reflecting back what you hear them saying. So, wow, I can't believe she said that to you. That must have not felt really good. Whatever that may be, because they know that you're listening in the conversation. But it takes practice if we're not used to speaking that way. I know in our family, we just said whatever. There was no filter, right? And you always felt criticized or whatever. So it was not safe. So it takes practice to have maturity as far as an emotional and mental space. But just think about the fruit that we have when we deal with the root issue as far as our own tolerance of someone's emotions. And then we learn the language, the fruit that we have in our children, that's going to change the generations, and it's going to change our legacy of which we've come from. But it can start with us. It can start with all of us tonight.
Yeah, that's powerful stuff. Oh my gosh, I don't even know where to go right now. But I want to circle back to this whole holding on to these stories, this kind of the lies that we've told ourselves, that everything's okay, everything's all right. These things have, happened in our family system. And as long as we don't talk about them, as long as we never deal with, as long as we never come face to face with them, then they can do no harm to us. Because I really feel like a lot of us are suffering from generational generational secrets that have been passed down in the DNA. And I don't think, how do we really go about beginning to break those chains and beginning to break that cycle. Because as together as I think I am, sometimes I'm like, am I passing some of this toxicity onto my own kids, right? So how do we start really breaking that? Outside of, we've done the self-inventory, we've talked through the truths for ourselves. I'm not going to go and sit down and have a conversation with my 13 and 16-year-old about all those truths about myself right now. Not enough discernment to know that. Not yet. When it's appropriate, right? Appropriate conversation.
Absolutely.
But then how do we really start kind of breaking those chains?
So the first thing is we have to acknowledge it within ourselves. That's the self-inventory. Secondly, is we now have boundaries around it. This is what this looks like. And this is where at times you do have to confront people in your family with your truth. And I say this with the P's with Bob, but this happens so many times. It's so common. I see it all the time in therapy. I'm just using the Thanksgiving story. I have to go to Thanksgiving and Bob is there. A boundary. And that means you have to have a direct conversation when mom invites you every year for Thanksgiving and has Uncle Bob there who's molested you, is to have a one-on-one conversation with mom and say, Mom, I love you and I enjoy seeing you every year for Thanksgiving, but I'm not going to come to Thanksgiving anymore as long as Bob is there. As you know, and as we discussed, Bob harmed me when we were younger and I just don't feel comfortable with that anymore. And this is what happens. People are like, well, then she's going to be mad at me, make me feel guilty, all this other stuff. You do not have a boundary. When you have a boundary, it's because you're ready for the guilting and the shaming and making you feel bad. And why are you causing problems and all this other stuff? Because when you're strong in your truth and you know that every time you go to Thanksgiving and you're sitting across the table from Bob and he's just smiling at you, act like nothing happened, that it takes a chip away from your soul every time you do that because you're not honoring your truth. At the end of the day, we have to honor our truth, and you handle mom or dad or whoever you have to make that phone call to with grace, with love, but with your boundary, and stand firm in your truth. Because what happens, and this is how we break the generational part of it, is we don't stand firm in our truth because we succumb to guilting, or I don't want to make mom upset. And then we start having the guilting language. Well, I don't know how many years mom has left. And we start doing all this stuff to ourselves. So then we self-sacrifice ourselves because we are thinking of the worst case scenario, our anxiety is coming up, all these other things. So the way that we start breaking generational things is exactly that. We start having boundaries. We address the people appropriately. Not everybody needs to have a family announcement. I'm not coming to Thanksgiving anymore because Uncle Bob did this to me. No, you don't need to do that at all. But if mom is hosting it and she's expecting you there, then that's the conversation. And you speak your truth in that. You don't have to go into all the details. And if mom is confronting you on that, well, mom, I know what happened to me. This is my truth. And I got to do what's good for me. I can come and see you another time, right? You can start negotiating other things of that nature. Because if we can't do that for ourselves, how are we going to handle our children's truth? And this is what comes back to family legacy. We probably, as parents, I know I can do this and I have to catch myself, and it happens all the time. 2 weeks ago, driving in the car, my son was having a tantrum about something. And in my mind, it went through my mind like, wow, you just don't know how good you have it. And I just wanted to come at him with that attitude, but I didn't. I caught it, right? We catch it. And then I listened, even though in my mind, I'm thinking how ridiculous this is. I held space for him. I asked him to share more with me. And I told him, thank you for sharing. And I offered no commentary, right? So not only do we have to speak our own truth, have boundaries, but then with our children, we have to allow them to have their truth, even when we see it differently, right? Because those elders above us see it differently. And as parents, especially parents, we have opportunities where we can also see that we can do the same exact thing, but it may not be around big traumas. It's the small traumas, small cuts. How many times we deny or dismiss our children are like the small teases, the little cuts along the way versus a big gash. So those are some very practical things that we can start turning things around real time tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have a question. So I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say I had a comment here. So I want to make sure I kind of get those steps right. So we talked about self-inventory. When setting boundaries as you confront that issue, standing firm in your truth, address people appropriately, and allow others to hold their truth, especially our children. Those were the things that I got. Okay, so we have a comment here. Unfortunately, sometimes cycles gets broken when trauma comes to the forefront, where it's in your face. But the hope is that it does not happen that way. That's why I would not want anyone to experience that. So I think that's talking about that that more a negative confrontation type of situation where like it's in your face. And I don't know if that even breaks the cycle of the trauma, or that just creates a new trauma.
Sometimes that changes relationships where I consider it repositioning, right? If you're in a conflict and someone's denying your truth, then you may have to reposition them. Even if they're a family member, that may mean that you cannot have intimate conversations with them. That may mean that you may not be able to spend as much time with them, because if you do, because they deny it, so you're going to be around them and deny your truth, that's also keeping the generation pattern going. Right? So sometimes you have to let people know it's not okay. And you let them know that it's not okay with your absence and not being readily available to them. And it's hard for people to do that because people will say, well, that's my family, right? So they use these excuses to keep themselves in their own trauma. And just because someone is family doesn't mean that they're not going to be harmful, abusive, and be toxic to your health.
Well, that was along the lines of what the question that I wanted to ask, because I mean, if Uncle Bob abused me or when I was a kid and I say, I don't want to come to Thanksgiving, I'm probably, if my mom has a problem with that, that's on her. But if it's less egregious, if you will, if let's just say Uncle Bob is an addict, right? He's he's an alcoholic, whatever. And I just, don't feel like being around Uncle Bob because I just think Uncle Bob don't ever have money, but yet you're an alcoholic. How is that possible, Uncle Bob? How are you still getting money to drink, but you never have any money? Or Uncle Bob is always traumatic in Uncle Bob's life. And I'm just like, Uncle Bob, I'm tired of hearing about it. You're like 65 and you haven't figured some of this crap out. How do you, because, one thing that I've been told a lot is I need to protect my energy. And protecting my energy feels like a lot of times distancing myself from people that I do absolutely love, but I just get to the point where I'm like, okay, so like we have choices to make here. Either you're going to do something differently, but if you're going to keep doing the same thing, how are you expecting a different outcome? And that you can go along in that insanity, but I do not want to be party to that insanity. So when it's not as egregious, how do you just kind of say, I can't participate in this foolery?
So I'm all about having boundaries before you have avoidance. So boundaries in that situation would be if he's calling you for money, Uncle Bob, I need you to take me off the list of people that you call and ask for money.
Okay.
And have no problem telling him the reason why and being okay with that. Right. But if there's repetitive and you just know that every time I go, Uncle Bob is there, I'm just not having a good time. I'm focused on him and I'm just there out of obligation. Then avoid. Then you can make some choices. But if we haven't necessarily addressed the problem and we're avoiding it, and that is a problem that Bob is just asking us for money, but we know he always has alcohol, but he's still trying to borrow money. I would say the boundary would be is having a direct conversation. Is please don't call me anymore and take me off a list of people that you call and ask for money. Right? That's the boundary. Versus because the other dysfunction that we can have in our family system is avoidance. Is that, people are negative. We don't want to hear about, so we just avoid them. And I think a good, again, to your point, depends on the situation. There's an opportunity for us to grow by us being able to gracefully and hold someone's dignity in having a boundary with them, but addressing certain things head on and then seeing how things happen. We teach people how to treat us. And if people feel like they can come and ask us anything and we just allow it or we avoid it, then to a certain degree, we contribute to that small trauma. But a lot of times we avoid it because we don't want a confrontation, because we feel, especially for certain family systems, certain family systems, we go from 1 to 10. It's either we avoid or we're blowing up, where we have to change that also in our family, that we can have healthy confrontation, healthy conversations, hold someone's dignity, because we also have what we call the window of tolerance, that I can hold difficult feelings. I can feel like, in my revenge head, I want to bash your head, but I can hold that and not have it come out in my tongue, right? It's real talk. So when you can able to hold your tongue and not let everything you feel spill out, that means you're increasing your window of tolerance and you don't have to avoid difficult situations. And that helps us grow in our maturity.
Well, what about this situation? So Uncle Bob We love Uncle Bob. We know Uncle Bob has issues. But everyone else is contributing to that, continue to contribute. Oh, well, it's not that bad. Oh, well, one beer won't hurt Uncle Bob.
Yeah.
Oh, well, this person it's just this, minimizing, and then you find yourself like, I don't even want to be around this situation. Like, I don't even want to be here in this moment, because I can't believe that we're sitting here pretending, or that you're contributing to this.
Right.
Other family members.
Or here's another one, kind of sort of with Uncle Bob.
I love Uncle Bob.
I love Uncle Bob. Uncle Bob may not have always been faithful to his wife. Everybody knows Uncle Bob may have been a womanizer. One breath, we are talking about Uncle Bob being a womanizer, but then in the next breath, we're introducing Uncle Bob to new women. I don't understand. What are we doing? Are we saving Uncle Bob, or are we letting Uncle Bob sink? What are we doing? And so you're just like, I don't even feel like having these conversations.
Well, that's very common in the sense that we have families that are enablers. Yes. And you see it all the time, where we would much rather give Uncle Bob a beer than to have him cranky, have him have the negative side of him. At least he's a happy drunk, right? You hear all of these things all the time. And I think the parts that you play in that is having the boundary. And if you feel like it's stealing my joy, stealing my energy, and I feel like I'm part of the problem, then you need to remove yourself from that. But this is also a part of that, is we have to be okay with upsetting the apple cart. We have to be okay with maybe our family's not going to the family reunion this year, that I have to be okay to say we're going to be doing something different this year, right? We have to be okay with that. And sometimes if we were guilted, and that's how our parents parented us, that means we're probably going to feel some guilt. We may want to process and understand, is it healthy guilt, or is it, I'm going to go as obligation because I don't want to upset anybody? So that goes back to protecting, and I do believe in that, protecting your energy, speaking your truth, and not being part of the problem. And part of the problem is enabling.
We have a couple comments here over on the watch party. It says, some enjoy living in their darkness. And another one says, we can only be in control of our actions. What do you say to that, about people enjoying to live in their live in darkness? And obviously we can only control ourselves. That's one of my favorite.
I agree with
that just gives such great freedom, because there's so much choice. When you have choice, you have so much power. That's why I think a place of choice is a place of power. So.
And I agree with both of those statements. There are people that are addicted to drama. There are people that are addicted to pain. There are people who don't know what it is to want to be successful. There's a cycle of either a poverty mindset, and that's not even necessarily dealing with money, right? So that's 100% correct. And we see that all the time, is that sometimes we all have this dark passenger side, and people rather sleep with that side than to understand the unknown. And that's usually what it comes down to. Success, health, mental wellness sometimes is an unknown factor. So then we much rather be in the parts that we know. And we see that all the time, from mild to extreme dramatic situations. So there's nothing you can do about that if you're watching that happen. You can draw boundaries. You can reposition people in your life at appropriate times. You can challenge them in a way that is healthy. And going back to that second statement, 100% correct, that we are all in control of ourselves. There's nothing that we can do to change other people. We can provoke change in them by being able to not allow certain things in our life, because we accommodate, we accept, and we allow stuff. And the stuff that we allow, accept, and accommodate will continue to happen. So we can control how we respond and not react. And we control the energy that we have. We control the family and the friends that we allow in our close mount spaces. So that always, to me, goes back to that statement that we talked about earlier, is taking a personal inventory. It's not only talking about how I feel, but who are the sisters that I have, the friends that I have around, who are the family that I gravitate towards at the family reunion? Am I gravitating towards Aunt Sally because I know she's a gossip and that's comfortable for me, right? What is that more about? It's more about me than even about Aunt Sally, right? Because like attracts like, even in family systems.
Well, it is already 8:59. So we have already come nearly to the end of an hour. So It has been fantastic having you on, and we definitely will have you on again. Tell folks how they can reach you, Janie.
Absolutely. They can find us at either lifecounselingsolutions.com or janielacy.com. And I'm on all social media platforms at Janie Lacy on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Life Counseling Solutions on all the same platforms.
All right. I dropped both of those down in the comments. So lifecounselingsolutions.com, janielacy.com. Janie shared with us in the pre-show that, you know, she has this program called Woman Redeemed, and she is testing out some new methodologies of delivering that program virtually. So for those of you who are watching who may not be here in the Central Florida area, reach out. There may be another opportunity for you to get involved. There may be an opportunity for you to engage your family in this type of conversation about our truths and how do we walk in our truth and honor our truth without self-sacrifice. I love that thing about, you know, so not sacrificing ourselves in the process. What secrets do we have? What are the secrets that we hold that we can do that self-inventory? Because when we can start with our own secrets, then we can hopefully inspire others to deal with their own. And then how do we confront those lies that are keeping our families in a state of toxicity, and it could potentially be holding us back? So that is all I have. Sister, we want the people to like, follow, and share Hey Sister. So hopefully you enjoyed this episode tonight. We got a thanks to Janie in the comments there. Anything you want to say in closing tonight, sister?
One last question. How soon should people just start counseling? Because I feel like all of us need it. So
well, if anybody relates with any parts of what we said, there's no reason to feel shameful. Actually, it's starting your healing process to realize, you know what, there's something that was said here that I resonate with. And it's been, especially if it keeps coming up, if there are things that keep coming up for us, to me, there's a little tug on our shoulder says this is something we need to pay attention to. So if we want a better future, we have to start in our present.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. So that is how we're going to end tonight. If we want a better future, we have to start in our present. So thank you all for tuning in to tonight's episode of Hey Sister, and we look forward to talking to you in a couple of weeks. Bye, everybody.
Bye.